In Lakehurst, everyone believes my stepmother is a saint who saved a grieving family. They did not see her slam me into the kitchen cabinet, hissing for me not to tell anyone while my chest screamed in pain. They missed my cousins secretly recording every blow from down the hall. Now, as I sit at the defendant's table accused of assaulting her, that recording waits in a purse like a match ready to incinerate her perfect victim act. My name is Kylie Hubbard, and I am 29 years old, though today I feel about 7. Walking into the Lakehurst County Courthouse usually feels like walking into my office. I know the bailiffs by name. I know which vending machine on the second floor eats your quarters and which judge likes his coffee black with 2 sugars. I know the specific, sterile scent of this place, a mix of lemon industrial cleaner and old paper that fails to mask the underlying odor of nervous sweat. But today, the click of my heels on the terrazzo floor does not sound authoritative. It sounds like a countdown. For the last 5 years, I have walked through these metal detectors carrying a badge and a gun, representing the Riverview Special Crimes Bureau. I am the one who builds the timeline. I am the one who interviews the weeping women and the bruised children. I am the one who puts the handcuffs on the monsters who think their front door gives them permission to become tyrants. Today, however, I surrendered my phone at the security checkpoint because my badge is sitting in a drawer at home, suspended pending an internal investigation. Today, I am not Detective Hubbard. I am the defendant in case number 492B, charged with domestic assault against a vulnerable family member. The irony is so thick, I can taste it like bile in the back of my throat. The system I have dedicated my entire adult life to upholding is currently gearing up to crush me, and the architect of my destruction is sitting right there at the plaintiff's table. Veronica Hale looks immaculate. She is wearing a soft, powder blue cardigan that makes her look smaller, more fragile than she actually is. It is a calculated wardrobe choice. Next to her sits Graham Lowell, a defense attorney whose hourly rate costs more than my first car. He is leaning in, whispering something to her, his hand hovering protectively near her shoulder. But it is Veronica's hand that draws my eye. Her right wrist is wrapped in a pristine white ace bandage. It is wrapped tightly, professionally, likely done by a nurse she charmed in the emergency room, though I know for a fact that the redness underneath is minimal at best. She rubs her temple with her uninjured hand, squeezing her eyes shut as if the very air in the room is too harsh for her delicate constitution. It is a masterclass in victimhood. If I did not know her, if I did not know the strength in those hands when they were shoving me backward into a granite countertop, I would probably feel sorry for her too. Standing just slightly behind her, like a ghost haunting his own life, is my father. Greg Hubbard looks 10 years older than he did last week. His shoulders are slumped forward in a permanent hunch, the posture of a man who has been carrying a weight he does not understand for too long. He is wearing his Sunday suit, the charcoal one that is slightly too big for him now that stress has eaten away his appetite. He refuses to look at me. He stares fixedly at a stain on the carpet near the court reporter's desk, his jaw working silently. I want to scream at him. I want to grab him by those slumped shoulders and shake him until he sees me, really sees me. Not the violent caricature his wife has painted, but I know it would be useless. He is too tired to fight. He is too tired to separate the truth from the comfortable lie Veronica feeds him with a spoon. I force my gaze away from them and toward the back of the room. The gallery is sparsely populated. A few court junkies, a bored reporter from the Lakehurst Gazette scrolling on his phone, and her, Mia Torres. My cousin is sitting in the 3rd row, pressed into the corner of the bench as if she is trying to disappear into the wood paneling. She looks terrified. Her dark curls are pulled back in a severe bun, and her hands are white-knuckled around the strap of her oversized leather tote bag. Inside that bag, buried under receipts and lip balm, is a smartphone with a cracked screen, and inside that phone is a digital audio file that acts as the only thing standing between me and a criminal record. Mia catches my eye for a fraction of a second and gives a tiny, almost imperceptible nod. It is the only lifeline I have. That recording is a grenade, and right now, the pin is still in. We are just waiting for the right moment to pull it.
All rise.
the bailiff bellows, his voice booming off the high ceilings. The room shuffles to its feet. Judge Samuel Whitaker enters from his chambers, his black robe flowing behind him like a storm cloud. I know Judge Whitaker. I have testified before him a dozen times. He is fair, rigorous, and has zero tolerance for theatrics. This terrifies me because Veronica's entire existence is theater. If she plays him right, if she pushes the fragile stepmother angle hard enough, his rigor will be directed entirely at me. Be seated, Whitaker says, adjusting his glasses as he opens the file in front of him. We are here for the arraignment in the matter of the state versus Kylie Hubbard, charges of misdemeanor assault and domestic battery. Hearing my name attached to those words creates a physical sensation of vertigo. The room tilts. I grip the edge of the defense table to steady myself. My lawyer, Jonah Price, places a calming hand on my forearm. Jonah is young, barely 32, with a suit that fits well but lacks the expensive sheen of Graham Lowell's attire. He does not have Lowell's reputation for destroying witnesses, but he has something better. He believes me. Mr. Lowell, Judge Whitaker says, looking over his spectacles, I see you are representing the complaining witness. Do you have an opening statement regarding the restraining order status? Graham Lowell stands up, buttoning his jacket with a flourish. He has a voice like oiled leather, smooth and rich. Thank you, Your Honor. We are here today, not out of malice, but out of necessity. My client, Mrs. Hale, is a victim of a prolonged campaign of intimidation and physical aggression by her stepdaughter. The incident in question, which resulted in injuries to my client's arm and significant emotional distress, was merely the boiling point of a young woman who is deeply unstable and consumed by jealousy. I feel the heat rise up my neck. Unstable, jealous. The words act as little daggers, aiming for the soft spots in my professional armor. Lowell continues, turning slightly so the few people in the gallery can see his profile. We understand that family dynamics are complicated. However, violence is a line that cannot be crossed. Mrs. Hale has tried for 2 decades to be a mother to this defendant. In return, she was brutally shoved into a cabinet in her own kitchen. We are asking for the maximum order of protection. My client is terrified in her own home. At the mention of the word terrified, Veronica lets out a soft, shuddering breath. She reaches out and clutches my father's sleeve. My father flinches, then pats her hand clumsily. It is perfect. It is sickening. Judge Whitaker nods slowly, his face unreadable. He looks down at the docket again, flipping a page. Then he stops. His hand freezes mid-turn. He frowns, squinting at the paper as if he has found a typo. Ms. Hubbard, the judge says, his voice losing some of its rote formality. It says here under employment, you are an investigator? I stand up. My legs feel like lead, but I force my spine straight. Yes, Your Honor. For the Riverview Special Crimes Bureau? Whitaker asks, looking directly at me now. Yes, Your Honor. 5 years. A ripple of murmuring goes through the room. The court reporter looks up from her typing. The bailiff, who had been staring at the ceiling, snaps his head toward me, squinting as he finally recognizes the face he has seen on the other side of the bench. In Lakehurst, you do not arrest the people who arrest the bad guys. It disrupts the natural order of things. I see, Whitaker says. He leans back in his chair, the leather creaking loudly in the sudden silence. It is rare to see a specialized investigator from that unit sitting at the defense table, Ms. Hubbard. Veronica stiffens. I can see the tension shoot through her spine. She did not think this part would matter. She thought my job would make me look like a bully, someone who knows how to hurt people. She did not anticipate that my badge comes with a built-in presumption of credibility that rivals her suburban saint act. She realizes the narrative is slipping, just an inch, so she yanks it back. She makes a small, whimpering noise, loud enough for the microphone to catch. He always protected her, she whispers to Graham, but her voice carries perfectly to the bench. Because of her badge, we were afraid to call the police because she is the police. It is a brilliant improvisation. She just turned my shield into a weapon. The murmuring in the room changes tone. Now they are wondering if I am one of those corrupt cops who hides behind the blue wall. My father looks down at his shoes, his face burning with shame. He hates this. He hates public scenes. Veronica knows that, and she is using his humiliation as a prop to bolster her story. Jonah Price stands up. He does not flourish. He does not button his jacket. He simply stands, solid and immovable. "Your Honor," Jonah says, his voice calm and level, cutting through the theatrical atmosphere Lowell has tried to build. The defense disputes the characterization of the defendant as unstable. Investigator Hubbard has a spotless record. She has received 3 commendations for her work with victims of domestic abuse. She undergoes mandatory psychological evaluations annually, all of which she has passed with flying colors. Jonah pauses, letting that sink in. He walks around the table, standing in the open space before the bench. The prosecution, or rather, Mr. Lowell, representing the complaining witness, wants to paint a picture of a jealous daughter lashing out. That is a convenient story. It is a simple story, but it is a false one. He turns and looks directly at Veronica. She meets his gaze with wide, wet eyes, trembling slightly. "This case is not about a daughter attacking a mother," Jonah continues. "This case is about a woman who has spent her career protecting victims, finally finding the courage to stop being one herself. We intend to prove that the injuries Mrs. Hale sustained were the result of Ms. Hubbard defending herself against an unprovoked physical assault initiated by the accuser." Graham Lowell shoots up from his chair. "Objection. Counsel is testifying." "I am outlining our defense, Your Honor," Jonah counters without missing a beat. "And we intend to prove that this pattern of aggression and subsequent gaslighting has been going on for 20 years. The only difference is that this time, Ms. Hubbard refused to be silent." Judge Whitaker holds up a hand to silence Lowell, who is sputtering indignantly. The judge's eyes lock onto mine. They are sharp, assessing. He is looking for the cracks. He is looking for the instability Lowell promised him. I hold his gaze. I do not blink. I do not cry. I let him see the exhaustion. Yes, but also the steel underneath it. In my head, I hear Veronica's voice from that night in the kitchen. I feel the phantom pain of the cabinet handle digging into my lumbar spine. I smell the wine on her breath as she leaned in close, her fingernails digging into my arm. "Don't tell anyone," she had hissed. "Nobody will believe you. You are just the ungrateful daughter. I am the one holding this family together." For years, that command ruled my life. Don't tell anyone she threw out Mom's pictures. Don't tell anyone she isolated Dad from his brother. Don't tell anyone she spent my tuition money on a renovation that never happened. Silence was the rent I paid to keep my father's life peaceful. But looking at my father now, shrinking away from the woman claiming to save him, I realized the peace was a lie. I bought nothing with my silence but more pain. I look past the judge, past the bailiff, to the back of the room. Mia is still clutching her bag. She looks at me, her eyes wide and frightened, waiting for a signal. I give her the smallest nod back. The file is in the bag. The match is in the box. I take a deep breath, inhaling the scent of bleach and old paper. My heart is hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird, but my hands are steady on the table. "Don't tell anyone." "I am going to tell everyone." "Proceed, Mr. Price," Judge Whitaker says, leaning forward. "I am listening." To understand how I ended up sitting at a defense table facing a prison sentence, you have to understand the silence of my childhood home in Maple Glen. It was not a peaceful silence. It was the heavy, suffocating quiet of a house holding its breath, waiting for a grief that never quite finished breaking us. I was 10 years old when my mother died. The cancer took her fast, stealing the warmth from our hallways and the smell of vanilla and cinnamon from the kitchen, leaving behind only a drafty emptiness. My father, Greg Hubbard, tried his best to fill the space she left, but he was a man hallowed out by loss. I remember watching him in the mornings before school. He would sit at the kitchen table with his coffee, staring at the empty chair opposite him with eyes that looked like shattered glass. But the moment I walked into the room, he would straighten his spine, force a wide, brittle smile onto his face, and say, "I am fine, kiddo. We are doing just fine." He was lying. Of course, we were not fine. We were drowning, and he was just treading water hard enough to keep my head above the surface. Then came Veronica. She did not enter our lives like a storm. She came in like a slow-acting gas, odorless and invisible until you were already sleepy and choking. I first met her 6 months after the funeral. Dad took us to an Italian restaurant on the expensive side of town, a place with cloth napkins and too many forks. He had met her at the art gallery he managed the accounting for. She was the new director, a woman who spoke in soft, cultured tones and smelled of expensive jasmine perfume. I remember she wore a silk blouse the color of cream, impeccable and unstained. When we sat down, she did not ask me what I wanted to eat. She smiled at the waiter and ordered for the table, choosing a sophisticated pasta dish I would never have picked for myself. "Greg tells me you are getting excellent grades. Kylie," she said, her eyes scanning my face but never quite making contact with my own eyes. "That is so important. A woman needs a sharp mind to survive in this world." It sounded like a compliment, but it felt like an inspection throughout the dinner. She reached out and touched my father's hand whenever his smile faltered. I watched his shoulders relax under her touch. I watched the gray exhaustion in his face recede just a fraction. I saw that she was giving him the one thing I could not: permission to stop being the sad widower for an hour. For that, I wanted to like her. I really did. I wanted to believe that this woman with the perfect manicure and the soft voice was the miracle we needed. But on the drive home, while Dad hummed along to the radio for the first time in half a year, I sat in the back seat feeling cold. She had called me sweetheart 3 times, but she had not asked me a single question about who I was, what I liked, or how I was feeling. She had only asked about my grades and commented that my dress was a little quaint. The changes started slowly. It was never an invasion. It was always presented as an improvement, a refresh. It began with the living room. Our house was full of my mother's touch, knickknacks she had collected, throw pillows she had sewn herself, and photographs. There were photographs everywhere. Frames covering the mantelpiece, lining the hallway, clustering on the side tables. They were evidence that we had been a family, that happiness had lived here once. One Tuesday afternoon, I came home from school to find the living room transformed. The cozy, cluttered warmth was gone. In its place was a stark, minimalist space that looked like the waiting room of a high-end dentist's office. The walls were painted a cool, detached gray. The comfortable floral sofa was replaced by a stiff beige sectional, and the photos were gone. All of them. I stood in the center of the room, my backpack sliding off my shoulder, panic rising in my throat. It felt like I had walked into the wrong house. "Do you like it?" Veronica asked. She was standing by the window, adjusting a new, abstract sculpture that looked like twisted metal. "It opens up the space so much, doesn't it? The old layout was just so suffocating, cluttered." "Where is Mom?" I asked, my voice small. "Where are the pictures?" Veronica turned to me, her expression one of patient pity, the kind you give a toddler who does not understand why they cannot eat candy for dinner. "Oh, Kylie, we put those away for safekeeping. We want the house to feel fresh, don't we? We want to look forward, not backward." "But I want to see her," I said, tears pricking my eyes. "I want the picture from the beach." She walked over to me, her heels clicking on the newly exposed hardwood. She did not hug me. She placed a hand on my shoulder, her fingers light and detached. "Kylie, look at me. Your father is finally starting to smile again, walking into a shrine to the past every day. It hurts him. You do not want to be the reason your father is sad, do you?" The question hit me like a physical blow. You do not want to be the reason your father is sad. It was a masterstroke. At 12 years old, my entire world revolved around protecting my dad from his grief. Veronica had just drawn a line in the sand. If I asked for my mother's memory, I was hurting my father. If I wanted to be a good daughter, I had to let Veronica erase my mother. No, I whispered, looking down at my sneakers. I don't want him to be sad. Good girl, she said, giving my shoulder a squeeze that felt more like a dismissal. I knew you were mature enough to understand. Now, go wash up. I made a reservation for 7. That became the pattern of my adolescence. Veronica would cut away a piece of my history or my identity, and when I flinched, she would tell me I was doing it for Dad. The gaslighting was subtle, woven into the fabric of our daily conversations. If I brought up a memory of Mom baking cookies, Veronica would sigh loudly and glance at the bedroom door where Dad was sleeping. Let's not bring up heavy topics tonight. Sweetheart, let's keep things light for Greg. So I learned to swallow the stories. I learned that my mother's name was a dirty word, something that caused pain. I stopped talking about my feelings because every time I did, Veronica twisted them until I felt selfish. You feel lonely? She would ask, raising a perfectly sculpted eyebrow. Kylie, your father works 50 hours a week to pay for this house. I spend my weekends organizing this home for you. And you feel lonely? That sounds a little ungrateful, don't you think? By the time I was 14, I was convinced that my emotions were defects. I thought my sadness was a burden I was imposing on these 2 noble adults who were just trying to survive. The only person who saw through the fog was my cousin, Mia. Mia lived 3 streets over. Her house was chaotic, loud, and smelled like garlic and laundry detergent. It was everything my house was not. I would go over there and sit on her bed, watching her fold clothes, and I would whisper the things I was not allowed to say at home. It feels like a museum, I told her one afternoon. It feels like a stage, and I don't know my lines. She is weird, Kai, Mia said, throwing a sock at me. My mom says Veronica is cold fish. She never comes to the barbecues. Who doesn't come to a 4th of July barbecue? It was true. Veronica had methodically, surgically removed us from the extended family. It was never a flat refusal. It was always a circumstance. Oh, Greg, I would love to go to your mother's house, she would say, pressing a hand to her forehead. But the pollen count is so high today, and you know how my migraines get. You go. Take Kylie. But Dad would never go without her. He was too anxious, too dependent on her social armor, so he would stay home to take care of her, and I would be given a choice: go alone and explain why my father wasn't there, or stay home in the gray silence. I usually stayed. Eventually, the invitations stopped coming. The aunts and uncles stopped calling Greg because he never answered. Veronica filled that void with her own social circle: wealthy art collectors, gallery patrons, people who drank wine out of crystal glasses and talked about tax shelters. She dragged Dad to these events, dressing him in new suits, showing him off like a pet project she had successfully rehabilitated. I was paraded around at these parties too. This is Greg's daughter, she would say, her hand resting on the back of my neck, fingers digging in just slightly to remind me to stand up straight. She is so studious, a little shy, but we are working on her social graces. I felt like a prop. I was the orphan she had graciously taken in, the project she was refining. When I tried to tell Dad how I felt, he looked at me with eyes that were pleading for me not to rock the boat. Kylie, honey, you are being too sensitive, he would say, rubbing his tired face. Veronica is trying so hard. She is not your mom. I know that, but she loves us in her own way. Can you just meet her halfway? For me? For me? So I met her halfway. I met her 3/4 of the way. I walked until I was standing on the edge of a cliff, and she was still asking me to take one more step. By the time I reached high school, Veronica's control had shifted from the house to my future. She took over my schedule with the efficiency of a corporate manager. She vetoed the art club because it was a waste of time, and signed me up for debate team because it looks better on a transcript. She monitored my wardrobe, throwing out anything she deemed tacky or cheap, replacing my comfortable hoodies with stiff, tasteful sweaters that made me itch. She instituted a curfew that was 2 hours earlier than any of my friends, not because of safety, but because nothing good happens after 9 o'clock. When I argued, she didn't yell. She never yelled. She just looked at me with that disappointment that cut deeper than anger. I am only doing this for your own good. Kylie, someone has to look out for your future since you seem determined to sabotage it with these distractions. I began to feel like I was disappearing. The real Kylie, the girl who liked messy art projects, who missed her mom, who wanted to laugh loudly and eat pizza on the floor, was shrinking, starving in the corner of her own mind. One night, during my junior year, I was studying late in my room. The house was silent, as always. I looked up at the wall above my desk. I had taped a poster there, a brochure from a pre-law program at a university in the city. Veronica had actually approved of it, calling it a sensible ambition. But as I stared at the image of the stone pillars and the scales of justice, I wasn't thinking about sensible ambition. I wasn't thinking about money or prestige. I was thinking about evidence. In a court of law, feelings didn't matter as much as facts. In a court of law, you couldn't just tell someone they were crazy for seeing what they saw. You needed proof. You needed truth. I ran my thumb over the glossy edge of the poster. I realized then that I wanted to live in a world where rules were written down, where because I said so wasn't a valid argument, and where victims were allowed to speak without being told they were making everyone else sad. I am going to go there, I whispered to the empty room. I am going to learn how to prove things. It was a small rebellion, silent and invisible, just like the war Veronica was waging on me. But as I sat there, listening to the silence of the house that was no longer a home, I made a vow. If my feelings were never going to be believed in this house, then I would find a place where the truth was the only thing that mattered. I would become someone who could not be gaslit. I did not know then that 15 years later, I would be the one on trial. I did not know that the very skills I learned to escape her would be the only weapons I had left when she finally decided to stop using words and start using her fists. All I knew was that I had to get out, and the law was my ticket. Downstairs, I heard the front door open. I heard Veronica's voice, light and musical, greeting my father. I heard him chuckle, a sound that was almost real but not quite. "Dinner is ready. Greg," she called out. "Kylie, come down. Do not make us wait." I stood up, smoothed my tasteful sweater, and put my mask back on. "Coming," I called back. I walked out of my room, closing the door on the only piece of truth I owned, and went downstairs to play my part in the perfect family. Leaving Maple Glen for the University of Riverton felt less like moving out and more like escaping a low-security prison where the warden smiled too much. For the first time in my life, the air I breathed belonged to me. I could wake up at noon on a Saturday without being told I was wasting daylight. I could eat cereal for dinner without a lecture on nutritional standards. I could leave a book on the coffee table without it being swept away into a drawer to maintain the aesthetic purity of the room. I chose to major in criminology. It was not a random choice. I needed to understand the anatomy of guilt, the architecture of lies, and the specific mechanics of how people hurt the ones they claim to love. I wanted to turn my childhood confusion into a science. By the time I graduated and pinned the badge of the Riverview Special Crimes Bureau to my belt, I thought I had exorcised the ghosts of that gray house. I was an investigator now. I dealt with tangible horrors, bruises, broken bones, and restraining orders. Compared to the brutal realities I saw in my case files, Veronica's passive-aggressive comments about my hair or my career choice seemed trivial. I thought I had outgrown her. I was wrong. You never really outgrow the people who know how to install buttons in your psyche just so they can press them later. Every Sunday night, I called home. It was a ritual I performed out of guilt and a desperate need to see my father's face, but I rarely got him alone. Veronica was always there, hovering in the frame of the video call. Her face perfectly made up, her smile tight and controlling. If I asked Dad how his week was, she would answer. "Oh, Greg is tired," she would say. patting his shoulder as he sat silently in his armchair. "We have been so busy with the gallery renovations. It costs a fortune, you know, but we make sacrifices, just like we sacrificed for your tuition, Kylie." She never missed a beat. Every conversation was a ledger, and she was always reminding me that I was in the red. She talked about money constantly: the cost of the new roof, the price of gas, the burden of property taxes. Meanwhile, my father nodded along, looking like a man listening to a radio station he could not quite tune in. Then came the call that changed the texture of the fear. I was 24 years old. "Your father's heart," Veronica said over the phone, her voice trembling with a performance of panic that sounded almost real. "The doctors say it is atrial fibrillation. He needs rest. You need to come home. Kylie, now." I drove 3 hours to Maple Glen with my siren off, but my heart racing at 100 miles an hour. When I arrived, Dad was sitting in the living room, looking pale but not critical. He smiled when he saw me, that same apologetic smile from my childhood. "I am okay, kiddo," he said, his voice raspy. "Just a little flutter. Veronica worries too much." "He is not okay," Veronica snapped, setting a tray of tea down on the coffee table with a sharp clatter. "And we need to be practical. If something happens, we need to be prepared." She reached into her tote bag and pulled out a thick stack of documents. She slid them across the table toward me. "I had the family attorney draw these up. It is a durable power of attorney. It gives us authority to manage his affairs if he has an episode." I picked up the papers. My training at the bureau kicked in immediately. I did not read them as a daughter. I read them as an investigator. I scanned the clauses, my eyes narrowing. "This is not just medical," I said, looking up at her. "This is financial, total asset control, access to all bank accounts, retirement funds, and the deed to the house." "It is standard," Veronica said, her voice turning icy. "It allows me to pay his bills if he is incapacitated." "Then why does it grant the power to sell real estate and liquidate stocks without his secondary signature?" I asked. I flipped to the back page. "And why is my name listed only as a witness, while you are the sole agent? Dad is only 55. He has a heart arrhythmia, not dementia. He can sign his own checks." "I am his wife," Veronica's voice rose, cracking the curated silence of the room. "I am the one taking care of him while you are off in the city playing detective. How dare you question my motives?" I looked at my father. "Dad, did you read this? Do you know this gives her the right to sell this house tomorrow if she wants to?" Dad looked between us, his eyes darting nervously. He looked small in his oversized armchair. "Kylie, please, Veronica is just trying to protect us. She handles the bills. It is just easier. Don't make it a fight." "I am not making it a fight. I am reading the contract," I said, my voice steady despite the shaking in my hands. "I will not sign this as a witness. If you want a power of attorney, we get an independent lawyer, someone who represents you, Dad, not Veronica." Veronica snatched the papers off the table. "You are unbelievable. You are so selfish. You think everyone is out to get something because that is how you think. You are just worried about your inheritance." "I am worried about him," I said, standing up. "Get out," she hissed. "If you are not here to help, then leave." I left that day, but I did not stop watching. I went back to Riverton, but I kept my ear to the ground. I started noticing things that did not add up. On social media, Veronica posted photos of a girls' trip to a spa resort in Arizona that cost $2,000 a night. She posted pictures of new designer handbags and a renovated sunroom. Yet, when I called Dad, he mentioned he was skipping his second cardiac medication because the copay was getting a little steep. The math was all wrong. The disconnect between the luxury she displayed and the poverty he pleaded was a red flag the size of a billboard. 2 months later, I drove back to Maple Glen. I did not call ahead. I had the name of an elder law attorney in my pocket, and I was determined to sit my father down and make him listen. It was a Tuesday evening. The sky was bruising purple as I pulled into the driveway. I used my key to let myself in. The house was quiet. I walked down the hallway toward the kitchen, hearing the clinking of glass. Veronica was there, pouring a glass of white wine. She froze when she saw me. My father was not in the room. "Where is Dad?" I asked. "He is sleeping," she said, taking a sip of wine. Her eyes were hard, devoid of the usual public warmth. "What are you doing here, Kylie? Come to inspect the premises?" "I came to talk to him about the lawyer," I said, stepping into the kitchen. "I found someone independent. We are going to review his finances. All of them." Veronica set the glass down. It hit the granite counter with a heavy thud. "You are not bringing a lawyer into this house." "It is already done," I said. "I saw the photos. Veronica, the spa, the bags. Meanwhile, Dad is cutting pills in half. I know what you are doing." She moved fast, faster than I expected. She rounded the island, closing the distance between us. "You ungrateful little brat. I have kept this family afloat for 20 years. I put up with your sullen moods, your disrespect, your constant neediness, and now you want to audit me?" "I want to protect him," I said, turning to walk back toward the hallway to find my father. "You are not going anywhere." She grabbed my arm. It was not a gentle hold. Her fingers dug into my bicep with shocking strength. I spun around, instinctively trying to pull away. "Let go of me," I said, my voice dropping to that command tone I used with suspects. "You are just waiting for him to die," she screamed. Her face contorted into a mask of pure, ugly rage. "You want the house. That is all this is. You want to kick me out." "I don't want the house. I want you to stop bleeding him dry," I shouted back. She shoved me. It was not a theatrical push. It was a violent, full-body slam. I stumbled back, my hip catching the sharp edge of the cabinet handle. Pain exploded in my side, radiating down my leg. I gasped, the air leaving my lungs. I was 29 years old. I was a trained investigator. I carried a gun for a living. And yet, in that kitchen, I was suddenly a child again, paralyzed by the sheer audacity of her violence. "You think you are so smart," she hissed, advancing on me. I put my hands up, palms open. "Veronica, stop. Do not touch me." She did not stop. She lunged, grabbing my shoulders and slamming me backward against the refrigerator. My head snapped back, hitting the stainless steel with a sickening crack. Then she hit me. Her open hand connected with the side of my face, a stinging slap that made my ear ring. Then she punched me, a closed fist into my shoulder, hard, driven by years of concealed resentment. "You ruin everything," she screamed, striking me again on the collarbone. I grabbed her wrists, struggling to restrain her without hurting her. I was stronger, but she was feral. We grappled, my boots squeaking on the polished floor. "Stop it!" I yelled, finally shoving her back to create distance. Down the hall, in the shadows near the living room archway, a figure stood frozen. It was Mia. She had come over to drop off some books for Dad. She was standing there, her face pale, her eyes wide with terror. She saw Veronica strike me. She saw me pinned against the fridge. Mia did not scream. She did not run in to pull us apart. She knew, just as I knew, that intervening would only turn Veronica's narrative against her too. Instead, Mia's hand disappeared into her large tote bag. She fumbled for a second, her fingers shaking, until she pulled out her phone. In the kitchen, Veronica had backed off, panting, her hair disheveled. She pointed a shaking finger at me, her chest heaving. "Don't you tell anyone," she hissed, her voice dropping to a low, venomous whisper that carried through the silence of the house. "Don't you dare tell anyone about this. No one will believe you. You are just the crazy stepdaughter who attacked me. I have the bruises to prove it now." I stood there, clutching my throbbing shoulder, staring at the woman who had successfully played the role of the saint for 2 decades. My heart was hammering against my ribs, not from fear anymore, but from clarity. She thought she had won. She thought silence was still her weapon. She did not know that 20 feet away, in the dark hallway, A red light on a screen had been blinking for the last 40 seconds. The physical struggle in the kitchen lasted less than 10 seconds, but it felt like a lifetime of suppressed rage finally snapping. I had Veronica by the wrists, my grip tight, trying to immobilize her hands to stop her from striking me again. I was not trying to hurt her. I was using a standard restraint technique I had learned in the police academy, a defensive maneuver designed to neutralize an attacker without causing permanent damage. But to an untrained eye, it looked like violence. And that was exactly the moment my father walked into the room. "Get off me!" I screamed, shoving her backward to create distance. Veronica stumbled back, her hip hitting the granite island with a thud. She did not try to regain her balance. Instead, she let the momentum carry her, crumbling to the floor in a heap of dramatic, soft knits. "Greg!" she shrieked, her voice shifting instantly from the guttural growl of an attacker to the high-pitched, terrified wail of a victim. "Greg, help me! She is hurting me!" My father stood in the doorway, his face the color of ash. He was clutching his chest, his eyes wide and darting between me, standing tall, breathing hard, hands balled into fists, and his wife, who was cowering on the linoleum, clutching her wrist as if I had snapped the bone. "Kylie?" Dad's voice was a broken whisper. "What are you doing?" "She hit me," I said, my voice shaking. I pointed a trembling finger at her. "Dad, she threw me into the cabinet. She slapped me. I was just trying to stop her." Veronica scrambled up from the floor and threw herself at him, burying her face in his chest. "She is lying. Oh God, Greg, look at my arm. Look at what she did." She held out her wrist. There was a red mark there, the imprint of my fingers where I had held her to stop her from punching me. It was real, but the context was a lie. "I told you," Veronica sobbed, her tears wetting his shirt. "I told you she hates me. I told you she has been waiting to do this. She came here screaming about the house, about the money, and then she just snapped." "That is not true," I yelled, stepping forward. Dad flinched. He physically recoiled from me, wrapping his arm around Veronica. "Stop it, Kylie. Just stop. Look at her. You are hurting her." "I am defending myself." "You are a police officer," Dad shouted, a vein bulging in his neck. "You are trained to handle criminals, not your mother. Look at you. You are out of control." The words hit me harder than Veronica's fist had. Out of control. It was the narrative she had been planting for years, the seeds she had watered with every "Kylie is so sensitive" and "Kylie is so intense" comment since I was 12. Now, the harvest was here. My father did not see his daughter defending herself against an abuser. He saw a weaponized woman attacking his fragile wife. "I am calling 911, Veronica said. She pulled away from Greg, her face streaked with mascara, and pulled her phone from her pocket. Her voice dropped to a shaky, terrified whisper that I knew was performative, yet perfectly executed. "Yes, I need police at 12 Maple Drive. My stepdaughter. She is violent. She is attacking me. I am scared. Please hurry." I stood frozen in the center of the kitchen. My training told me to de-escalate, to separate the parties, to secure the scene. But I was not the investigator here. I was the suspect. I watched her give the dispatcher the details, ensuring she mentioned that I was trained in combat and highly agitated. She was building the probable cause before the squad car even turned onto our street. When the patrol car arrived, the lights flashing blue and red against the living room window, I felt a wave of nausea. I knew these officers, not personally, perhaps, but I knew the type. They were county deputies, guys who probably saw my name on the specialized task force roster and thought I was arrogant. 2 deputies walked in. One was older, tired-looking. The other was young, hand resting on his belt. "What is going on here?" the older one asked. Veronica was sitting on the sofa, an ice pack, which she had somehow produced in record time, pressed to her wrist. Dad was sitting next to her, holding her other hand, looking like he was about to have the heart attack we had all been fearing. "She attacked me in the kitchen," Veronica said, her voice trembling. We were arguing about her father's medical bills. She got angry. She shoved me into the counter and twisted my arm. The deputies turned to me. I was standing by the fireplace. My hair was messy from the struggle. My face was flushed with adrenaline and rage. I was breathing heavily. I looked guilty. "It was self-defense," I said, trying to keep my voice level, trying to sound like a cop. She initiated physical contact. She struck me in the face and shoulder. I restrained her wrists to prevent further assault. The young deputy looked me up and down. "You restrained her? You are Investigator Hubbard, right? From the Special Crimes Bureau?" "Yes," I said. "I know how this looks, but you need to check her hands. If you check her palms, you will see redness from where she slapped me. Look at my face. My cheek is swelling." The older deputy leaned in, squinting at my face. "I don't see much of a mark, ma'am, but the lady on the couch has a pretty clear grip mark on her arm." "Because she was punching me," I insisted, my voice rising in frustration. I had to stop her. "Ma'am, you need to lower your voice," the young deputy said, stepping into my personal space. "You are agitated." Agitated. The word Veronica had used on the phone. "I am not agitated. I am frustrated," I said. "She is lying. My father, Dad, tell them she was the one screaming." I looked at my father. This was it, the moment of truth. He had to have heard the start of it. He had to know that Veronica was not this fragile flower. Greg Hubbard looked up at the deputies. He looked at Veronica, who let out a soft whimper and buried her face in his shoulder. He looked at his own hands, shaking in his lap. He was terrified of the conflict. He was terrified of losing the woman who managed his life. He was terrified of the noise. "Kylie was very upset," Dad said, his voice hollow. "She was shouting about the money. I came in and saw her pushing Veronica. Veronica fell. That is what I saw." The silence that followed ripped through me. He did not lie, exactly. He just omitted the truth that would have saved me. He chose the easy way out. "Okay," the older deputy said, sighing. "Ms. Hubbard, we are going to need you to come down to the station. We can handle this informally since it is family. Maybe just a statement for now. But we cannot leave you here if the homeowner feels unsafe." "I am being detained?" I asked, the cold reality settling in. "We are asking you to come voluntarily so we do not have to cuff you in front of your dad," the deputy said. "But yeah, you are leaving this house tonight." I walked out of the house I grew up in, flanked by 2 uniforms. I did not look back at my father. I could not bear to see the relief on his face that the problem was being removed. As we walked to the patrol car, I glanced toward the side of the house, near the garage. The shadows were deep there, but I saw movement. It was Mia. She was crouching behind her car, clutching her oversized bag to her chest. Her face was wet with tears. She saw me being escorted out like a criminal. I wanted to call out to her, to ask if she saw it, but I stopped myself. If I dragged her into this now, Veronica would destroy her too. Mia was soft. She could not handle the police, the questions, the pressure. So I just looked at her, shaking my head slightly, telling her to stay hidden. At the station, the humiliation was bureaucratic and slow. Because I was law enforcement, they treated me with a stiff, awkward courtesy that was almost worse than rudeness. They did not fingerprint me immediately, but they wrote me up. Misdemeanor domestic assault. "The victim is requesting an emergency protective order," the desk sergeant told me, refusing to meet my eyes. "She says she is afraid you will come back with your service weapon." "I do not carry my weapon off duty when visiting family," I said through gritted teeth. "And I am not the aggressor here." "The judge will sort it out. Hubbard," he said, handing me a slip of yellow paper. "Court date is Tuesday. Until then, stay 500 feet away from the residence and Mrs. Hale, and the captain is going to have to suspend you, pending investigation. Standard procedure. You know the drill." I walked out of the station at 3 a.m. I sat in my car in the empty parking lot and screamed until my throat felt like it was bleeding. I had lost my family, my reputation, and my career in the span of 4 hours. and the woman who did it was sleeping soundly in my childhood bedroom. The arraignment hearing 3 days later was a nightmare. The courtroom was small, used for preliminary hearings. Veronica sat there with a new bandage on her wrist, looking even more waif-like than before. Her lawyer, Graham Lowell, did all the talking. "Your Honor," Lowell said, his voice smooth and grave, "my client is terrified. We are talking about a trained investigator who used police combat tactics on a 50-year-old woman. Ms. Hubbard has a history of resentment toward her stepmother. This was an explosion waiting to happen." I sat next to Jonah Price, the lawyer I had hired an hour after leaving the station. Jonah was good, but he had nothing to work with. "My client denies the allegations," Jonah said. "This was mutual combat at worst, self-defense at best. Ms. Hubbard sustained injuries to her face and shoulder. Injuries that were not documented in the police report," Lowell countered, waving the paper the deputies had written. The officers on the scene described Ms. Hubbard as agitated and aggressive, while Mrs. Hale was visibly injured and cooperative. The judge, a stern woman named McKinnon, looked over her glasses at me. She saw a cop who had lost control. She saw a daughter beating up a mother. "I am granting the temporary protective order," Judge McKinnon ruled. "Ms. Hubbard, you are to have no contact with the plaintiff. You are to surrender any personal firearms, and considering the nature of your job, I am notifying the Bureau that this order is in effect." It was a rubber stamp on my destruction. Veronica dabbed at her dry eyes with a tissue, looking at the judge with gratitude, while I sat there, hands clenched in my lap, feeling the entire justice system, the system I believed in, the system I served, crushing me under its weight. I drove back to my apartment in Riverton in a daze. My phone was blowing up with texts from colleagues asking if the rumors were true. I ignored them all. I sat on my floor in the dark, staring at the wall, wondering how I could possibly fight this. It was her word against mine, and her word was wrapped in money and tears. My word was wrapped in anger and a badge that people were all too ready to believe I had abused. I was considering pouring a glass of wine, or maybe the whole bottle, when my phone buzzed on the floor beside me. It was a message from Mia. I hesitated. Mia had not said a word since that night. I assumed she had been cowed into silence, or worse, convinced by the family that I was the villain. I picked up the phone. The text was short. "Sis, I have something, but I'm really scared." Below the text was a video file attachment. My heart stopped. I remembered Mia in the hallway. I remembered the glint of the phone, but I had assumed she was calling for help, or texting a friend, or just freezing. I tapped the file. The video player opened. The image was shaky, vertical, filmed from a low angle in the shadows of the hallway. On the screen, the kitchen was visible. The audio was crystal clear. Thwack, the sound of a slap. Thud, the sound of a body hitting a cabinet. "You ruin everything!" Veronica's voice, distorted by rage, rang out from the tiny speakers. Then my voice, "Stop it! Do not touch me!" Then the struggle, the shove, my father walking in, and the flip. But the video did not end there. It kept rolling. It showed the police leaving. It showed Veronica sitting on the couch after the door closed behind me. It showed her turning to my father, her face completely dry, her voice dropping to a low, terrifying calm. "Now they will believe me," she said to him on the screen. "Just sign the power of attorney. Greg, we need to secure the accounts before she tries to sue us. I did this for us." And then she looked directly toward the hallway, as if sensing a presence, and whispered the words that made the blood freeze in my veins. I sat there in the dark, the glow of the phone illuminating my face. I played it again and again. I was not crazy. I was not the aggressor. And for the first time in 20 years, I was not the one who had to be silent. The match had been struck. Now, I just had to figure out how to burn her down without burning myself alive in the process. Jonah Price's office was not in the glass tower district where Graham Lowell looked down on the city like a gargoyle in a three-piece suit. Jonah worked out of a converted brownstone on the edge of the garment district, a place where the floorboards creaked and the coffee machine made a sound like a dying engine. But when I sat across from him, I did not see a budget lawyer. I saw a shark who was hungry. Jonah was young, maybe 32, with sleeves rolled up to his elbows and eyes that dissected you before you even finished a sentence. He listened to my story without interrupting, his pen scratching furiously against a yellow legal pad. I did not sanitize the details. I told him about the argument, the push, the slap, and my own use of force to restrain her. I told him how it looked to the deputies. I told him about the 20 years of psychological erosion that preceded the physical blow. When I finished, silence hung in the room for a long moment. Most lawyers would tell you to take a plea, Jonah said, leaning back in his chair. They would tell you that a misdemeanor domestic assault charge goes away with 6 months of probation and an anger management class. They would say it saves your career. I am not taking a plea, I said, my voice hard. I did not assault her. If I take a plea, she wins, and she gets control of my father's assets. Jonah smiled, a sharp, dangerous expression. Good, because I have no interest in a plea deal. Lowell thinks he's fighting a standard domestic dispute. He thinks he can bury you with character assassination, but he forgets that you are not just a daughter, you are an investigator. So, let us stop playing defense. Let us investigate. That was the green light I needed. The first step was the video. Mia had sent it to me via an encrypted messaging app, terrified that her parents would somehow see it on her phone bill, which was technologically impossible, but emotionally very real for her. I forwarded it to Jonah, and we projected it onto the monitor on his desk. Watching it was like reliving the trauma in high definition. The sound of the slap was louder than I remembered. Thwack! It echoed in the small office. Then the thud of my body hitting the cabinets. My voice, desperate and high, pleading for her to stop. And then, the whisper, "Don't tell anyone." It sent a shiver down my spine, cold and sharp, but Jonah was not looking at the violence. He was focused on the end of the clip, the part I had missed in the chaos of the moment. On the screen, the police lights had just faded from the window. The door had closed. Veronica was sitting on the sofa, her posture instantly relaxing from the curled-up victim pose she had held for the deputies. She turned to my father, who was standing there looking broken. "Now they will stand by me," Veronica said, her voice steady, devoid of tears. "It is better this way, Greg. She was always a liability. Just sign the power of attorney. We need to secure the accounts before she tries to sue us for emotional damages. I did this to keep us safe." Jonah hit the spacebar, freezing the image on Veronica's face. "There it is," Jonah said softly. "That is not fear. That is strategy. She baited you. She knew exactly what buttons to push to get a reaction. And when she didn't get the violent reaction she wanted, she manufactured the scene anyway. And look at the timing. She pivots immediately to the financial documents." "It proves motive," I said, feeling a surge of adrenaline. "She wanted me out of the way so she could force him to sign the durable power of attorney without a witness." "Exactly," Jonah said. "We need to get this authenticated, and we need your cousin." He set up a secure video call with Mia. When her face appeared on the screen, she looked pale, her eyes red-rimmed. She was hiding in her car again. "Mia," Jonah said, his voice gentle but firm. "You know what you have here, right? This is the smoking gun. But Lowell is going to come after you. He is going to say you are biased. He is going to say you tampered with it. He is going to pressure your parents to make you retract it." "My mom already told me to delete it," Mia whispered. "She said I am ruining the family." "You are saving a life," I said, leaning toward the microphone. "Mia, listen to me. She is isolating Dad. She is taking his money. If you delete that, she wins. And Dad, I don't know what will happen to him." Mia took a deep breath, wiping her nose with her sleeve. "I won't delete it, but I am scared. Kylie." "Write everything down," Jonah instructed. "Right now, while it is fresh. Write down where you were standing, why you started recording, What you heard before the recording started. Make it a sworn affidavit. Once it is on paper, it is harder for them to twist your memory. With Mia secured as our star witness, Jonah unleashed me to do what I did best. For the next 3 days, I did not sleep. I turned my small apartment into a war room. I was suspended from the bureau, so I did not have access to official databases, but I knew how to navigate the public record system better than anyone. I had a credit card and 24 hours a day to dig. I started with the name Veronica Hale. I knew she had been married before. Dad had mentioned it vaguely, something about a high school sweetheart and a brief mistake in her 20s. But when I pulled the marriage licenses from the county clerk's digital archives, I found 2 previous husbands, neither of whom fit the description of a brief mistake. Husband number 1, Alan Foster, married 1998, divorced 2004. Husband number 2, Marcus Dean, married 2007, divorced 2012. I started cross-referencing their names with property records. The pattern emerged almost immediately, stark and undeniable. In 2003, 1 year before the divorce, Alan Foster sold his primary residence, a 4-bedroom colonial in a wealthy suburb. The proceeds, over $300,000, were deposited into a joint account that was closed 3 months later. In the divorce decree, Alan claimed financial hardship. Veronica walked away with a settlement that seemed disproportionate to his reported assets. I tracked down Alan Foster. He was living in a rental apartment in Ohio now. I did not call him yet. I just noted the trajectory. Downward spiral. Then came Marcus Dean, a small business owner. In 2011, his business filed for bankruptcy. 6 months before the filing, the business had taken out a massive line of credit. The co-signer, Veronica Dean. But the funds had vanished into consulting fees paid to a shell company registered in Delaware. She drains them, I muttered to myself, taping a printout of the bankruptcy filing to my wall. She gets in, inflates the lifestyle, drains the liquidity, and then leaves when the well runs dry. But the most damning discovery was not an ex-husband, it was an uncle. I found a lawsuit filed in civil court 5 years ago, right before she met my father. The plaintiffs were the children of a man named Arthur Hale, Veronica's uncle. The suit alleged undue influence. Arthur was 82 when he died, in the last year of his life. Veronica had moved in to be his caregiver during those 12 months. Arthur had amended his will 3 times. He had signed over the deed to his vacation home to Veronica for a nominal fee of $1. He had added her name to his investment accounts. The children sued after he died, claiming Veronica had isolated him, screened his calls, and convinced him that his children had abandoned him. It sounded terrifyingly familiar. I pulled up the court transcripts. Veronica had testified, weeping on the stand, claiming she was the only one who cared for poor Uncle Arthur while his greedy children ignored him. She had won. The judge ruled there was insufficient evidence of coercion. The children lost everything. She had done this before. She had perfected the script. My father was just the latest production. I printed the transcripts and pinned them to the center of the wall. The timeline was a flat line of destruction. Alan, Marcus, Arthur, and now Greg. But I needed something that connected her specifically to my father's vulnerability. I needed to know how she got her hooks in so deep, so fast. I went digging into the digital archives of my own life. I logged into an old cloud storage account where I had backed up my mother's laptop after she died. I had not looked at these files in 10 years. It felt like opening a grave. I searched for emails. I searched for the word gallery. I found an email sent from my mother to her sister, my aunt, dated 3 months before Mom passed away. Subject: The woman at the gallery. Body: I went to pick up Greg for lunch today, and that woman, Veronica, was in his office again. She brings him coffee. She touches his arm when she talks. I know I am sick, and maybe I'm being paranoid, but the way she looks at him, it is like she is measuring him for a suit. She knows I am dying. Sarah, and I think she's already planning the funeral so she can sit in the front row. I read the email 3 times, tears blurring my vision. My mother had seen it. Even through the fog of chemotherapy, she had seen the predator circling. Veronica had not just stumbled upon a grieving widower, she had been stalking him while his wife was still breathing. I grabbed my phone and took a picture of the email. I sent it to Jonah with the caption, "It was premeditated, all of it." The next morning, I met Jonah at his office. I brought my file, 3 inches thick of property deeds, bankruptcy filings, and the civil suit regarding Uncle Arthur. Jonah spread the documents out on his conference table. He looked at the web of financial ruin Veronica had left in her wake. He looked at the email from my mother. He looked at the bankruptcy filing of Marcus Dean. "This is not just a defense anymore," Jonah said, his eyes wide. "This is a RICO case wrapped in a cardigan." "She targets vulnerable men," I said, pointing to the timeline. Alan was going through a midlife crisis. Marcus was overwhelmed by his business. Arthur was dying. And Dad was a grieving widower with a paid-off house and a healthy life insurance policy. "We are going to pivot," Jonah said, standing up and pacing the small room. "We are not just going to argue self-defense. We are going to introduce character evidence. We are going to argue that she engineered the confrontation to remove the one obstacle standing between her and your father's remaining assets." "Will the judge allow it?" I asked. "It is a lot of history for a misdemeanor assault case." "It goes to motive," Jonah said. "It goes to credibility. If we can show she has a pattern of using legal mechanisms, wills, deeds, powers of attorney, to commit theft, then her request for a restraining order looks less like fear and more like a tactical nuke." He turned to me. "But Kylie, if we do this, we are declaring total war. She will come after you with everything. She will drag your mother's memory through the mud. She will make your father choose, publicly, between his wife and his daughter, and he might choose her." I thought about my father's face in the window as the police car drove away. I thought about the way he shrank into himself when she touched him. I thought about the email from my mother, warning us from beyond the grave. If I stopped now, I could probably get a plea deal. I could walk away with a record, but I would be free. But my father would be alone with her, and when he was dry, she would move on to the next target. "He might choose her," I acknowledged, my voice steady. "But if I don't fight, he does not even have a choice. He is just prey." I walked over to the wall where Jonah had taped up the photo of Veronica's bruised wrist, the evidence of my crime. "Let's do it," I said. "Let's show the world what she really is." I spent the rest of the night organizing the exhibits. Exhibit A, the video. Exhibit B, the bankruptcy of Marcus Dean. Exhibit C, the probate records of Arthur Hale. I was building a trap. For the first time in weeks, I did not feel like the defendant. I felt like the investigator. I felt like the hunter. And Veronica Hale had no idea that the ungrateful daughter she had tried to silence was about to bring the ghosts of her past 3 victims into the courtroom to sit right next to her. While Jonah and I were busy constructing a fortress built of bank statements and property deeds, Veronica was fighting a different kind of war. She was fighting in the cloud, a place where truth is flexible, and the person with the saddest caption wins. I woke up on Wednesday morning to a text from a friend I had not spoken to since college. It was just a screenshot. It was a post from Veronica's Instagram account, which was usually reserved for photos of art gallery openings and meticulously plated salads. The photo was a close-up of her hand. The bandage was pristine white, stark against her black sweater. She was holding a mug of tea, looking out a window. Her face obscured, but her posture screaming fragility. The caption read, "Family can hurt you the most. Trying to find peace in my own home after a terrifying week. Thank you to everyone for the prayers. I just want to be safe." It had 432 likes. I scrolled through the comments, my stomach churning. "So sorry you are going through this. V, you are a saint for putting up with so much. Sending love. Stay strong against the hate." She had effectively court-martialed me in the court of public opinion before I had even had my coffee. To these people, she was the martyr. I was the monster. She did not name me. Of course, she was too smart for that. Naming me would look aggressive. Leaving it vague made her look protective, as if she were shielding the very person who hurt her. It was a masterclass in manipulation. By noon, the digital whisper had turned into a shout. The Riverton Daily, a local paper that usually covered high school football and city council meetings, ran a story online. The headline hit me like a physical slap. Special crimes investigator accused of assaulting family member. The article was brief, factually accurate in the worst possible way, and utterly damning. It stated that Kylie Hubbard, an investigator with the Bureau, had been charged with misdemeanor assault. It mentioned the restraining order. It quoted the police report about me being agitated. It did not mention my bruises. It did not mention the financial coercion. It did not mention that the family member had a history of draining the bank accounts of every man she married. Walking into the Bureau that afternoon to meet with Internal Affairs felt like walking into a funeral where I was the corpse. The squad room, usually a cacophony of ringing phones and raucous banter, went dead silent when I swiped my badge. Detectives I had worked cases with, men and women I had trusted with my life on raids, suddenly found their paperwork fascinating. No one looked me in the eye. I saw a hushed conversation stop abruptly by the coffee machine. I felt the weight of their judgment. In law enforcement, there is a thin blue line, but there is also a deep, unspoken fear of the loose cannon. If I beat up my stepmother, what did that say about my judgment in the field? I walked straight to Captain Miller's office. He did not offer me a seat. "We received a letter, Kylie," Miller said, sliding a piece of paper across his desk. It was typed, anonymous, but I recognized the voice immediately. "I am writing out of concern for the safety of the community. Investigator Hubbard has shown a pattern of aggression and an inability to control her temper. Even with her own family. She has threatened her stepmother multiple times. Is this the kind of person who should be carrying a badge?" It was Veronica. The phrasing pattern of aggression was exactly what she had told the deputies. "It is standard procedure," Miller said, refusing to meet my gaze. "Pending the outcome of the criminal investigation, you are placed on unpaid administrative leave. I need your badge and your service weapon." Taking the gun off my belt was routine. Unclipping the badge felt like peeling off my skin. I placed the metal shield on his desk. It clattered loudly in the quiet room. That badge was not just a piece of metal. It was the proof that I was not the crazy, emotional girl Veronica always said I was. It was my objective reality. And now, she had taken that too. "This is a mistake, Captain," I said, my voice steady but hollow. "She is manipulating the system." "Then let the system work," Miller said. "Clear your name, Hubbard, then we will talk." I walked out of the building carrying a cardboard box with a stapler, a framed photo of my mother, and a succulent plant. I took the back exit to avoid the press. My phone rang as I was unlocking my car. It was my father. For a split second, a foolish hope bloomed in my chest. Maybe he had seen the news and realized it had gone too far. Maybe he was calling to check on me. "Kylie," his voice was thin, trembling. "Why are you doing this?" "Why am I doing this?" I repeated, gripping the steering wheel. "Dad, I just lost my job. I just surrendered my badge." "Veronica is a wreck," he said, ignoring my pain entirely. "She is crying all day. The neighbors are asking questions. Do you have any idea how embarrassing this is for us? For me?" "She hit me. Dad," I said, the words tasting like ash. "You saw it. You walked in right after." "I saw you shoving her," he snapped. "I saw my wife on the floor. Look, I can't take this stress. My heart rate was up all night. If you care about me at all, you will stop this nonsense. Drop the lawyer. Apologize to her. Maybe then she will drop the charges." "She wants the power of attorney, Dad," I said. "That is what this is about. Can't you see that?" "She wants to take care of me," he shouted, his voice cracking. "Which is more than I can say for you right now. You are tearing this family apart." He hung up. I sat in the silence of my car, the disconnect tone buzzing in my ear. He had not asked if I was okay. He had not asked about my job. He was just a ventriloquist's dummy, and Veronica's hand was working the levers of his jaw. The isolation did not stop with me. By Friday, Mia was feeling the shockwaves. She called me in tears. "They kicked me out of the family group chat," she sobbed. Aunt Linda called me. She said I was a snake for recording private conversations. She said I was trying to break up Greg's marriage. "Mia, I'm so sorry," I said, guilt washing over me. "You don't have to do this. You can back out." "No," Mia said, sniffing loudly. "I am not backing out. They are mean. Kylie, they are so mean. But I watched the video again. I know what I saw. Let them kick me out. I don't want to be in a chat with people who think hitting someone is okay." Her bravery shamed me. She was 22, terrified, and facing the wrath of the entire extended family. Yet she stood firm. I had to be at least as brave as she was. But the enemy was relentless. That evening, Graham Lowell appeared on a local talk show segment about domestic violence awareness. He sat there in his $3,000 suit, looking grave and concerned. "We often think of domestic violence as a husband hitting a wife," Lowell told the host, "but elder abuse is rising. We see cases where adult children, often those in positions of authority, lawyers, police officers, use their knowledge of the system to intimidate their aging parents. They hide behind their professional reputations to mask deep-seated psychological instability." He never said my name. He didn't have to. Everyone in Lakehurst knew exactly who he was talking about. He was poisoning the jury pool. He was planting the idea that my badge was not a shield, but a weapon I used to terrorize my poor, aging stepmother. On Saturday, I received a request for a meeting. It was unofficial. Off the record. We met in the back room of a diner 2 towns over. Graham Lowell was there, looking bored. Veronica was there, wearing sunglasses indoors. Jonah sat next to me, his posture rigid. "We can make this go away," Lowell said, sliding a piece of paper across the sticky table. "A stipulated plea. You admit to a summary offense. Disorderly conduct. No jail time. You pay a fine. You agree to a 2-year stay-away order. In exchange, Veronica drops the assault charges and requests the DA close the case." "And the civil side?" Jonah asked, his eyes narrowing. "Greg signs the power of attorney," Veronica said. She took off her sunglasses. Her eyes were dry, cold, and calculated. "Because he needs stability, and you agree to stop harassing us about his finances. You walk away. Kylie, you go back to your life, if you still have one, and we go back to ours." It was tempting. God, it was tempting. I was tired. I was suspended. My father hated me. If I signed that paper, the fear of prison would vanish. I could move to another state. I could start over. I could stop fighting a battle that felt like it was killing me by inches. "Think about it," Lowell said, checking his watch. "It is a generous offer." "We will let you know," Jonah said. I drove home in silence. The temptation to quit was a physical weight in my chest. Why was I fighting for a father who chose his abuser over me? Why was I ruining my life for a house I did not even live in? I needed to clear my head. I drove to the community center on the north side of Riverton. There was a support group meeting there tonight. I had referred victims there a dozen times as an investigator, but I had never walked through the doors myself. I sat in the back row of the metal folding chairs. The coffee was stale. The lighting was harsh. The people in the circle were ordinary: a librarian, a mechanic, a college student. They shared their stories of being hit, stories of being yelled at, stories of being told they were crazy. Then, a woman in her 40s spoke up. She had a scar running down her cheek. "He told me that if I left him, he would ruin my reputation," she said softly. "He was a doctor. Everyone loved him. He said no one would believe a nobody like me against a pillar of the community. So I stayed. I protected his image because I thought if I protected him, he would eventually stop hurting me." She looked around the room, her eyes landing briefly on me. "But he didn't stop," she continued. "He only stopped when I realized something. The moment I stopped protecting the image of the person hurting me was the moment I started protecting myself. Silence is not peace. Silence is just permission. The air left my lungs. Silence is just permission. I had spent my childhood protecting my father's peace. I had spent my adolescence protecting Veronica's image of the perfect family. And even now, staring at that plea deal, I was considering protecting them again. If I signed that paper, I was giving her permission to finish what she started with my father. I was giving her permission to do it to the next man. I stood up and walked out of the meeting before it ended. I sat in my car and pulled up the audio file on my phone. I put my headphones in. I listened to the slap. I listened to the scream. And then I listened to the whisper, "Don't tell anyone." It wasn't a request. It was a command. It was the cornerstone of her power. As long as I didn't tell anyone, she was safe. I texted Jonah. "No deal. We go to trial." Then I opened my social media apps. I had been dark for a week, afraid to look. I went to my own profile. I didn't post a rant. I didn't post a defense. I posted a single image. It was a picture of me and Mia from 10 years ago, smiling at a carnival. The caption was simple. "The truth does not need a filter. See you in court." I hit send. The war for public opinion was over. I was done trying to be liked. I was done trying to be the good daughter. Now, I was just the witness who was going to burn the house down to save the people inside. The pre-trial hearing was not held in the grand courtroom with the high ceilings and the mahogany gallery. It took place in a small, windowless room that smelled of floor wax and stale coffee, a place where the air felt recycled and thin. This was where the real war was fought. Before a jury ever saw a face or heard a tearful plea, the boundaries of the truth were drawn here, in the motion in limine hearing. The subject of the battle was a digital file, 4 minutes and 12 seconds long, currently residing on a flash drive on the defense table. Graham Lowell stood up, smoothing the front of his impeccable charcoal suit. He did not look like a man defending a woman accused of assault. He looked like a man offended by the very existence of the proceedings. "Your Honor," Lowell began, his voice filling the small room with a rich baritone authority. "The defense moves to exclude the video recording made by Ms. Torres. This evidence is fruit of the poisonous tree. It was obtained illegally, without the consent of my client, in the privacy of her own home. New York is a one-party consent state for wiretapping. Yes, but Ms. Torres was not a party to the conversation. She was an eavesdropper. She was hiding in a hallway, recording a private marital dispute between a husband, a wife, and a stepdaughter." He paused, letting the weight of the legal standard sink in. "If we allow this," Lowell continued, gesturing vaguely toward me as if I were a contagion, "we set a dangerous precedent. We tell every angry teenager, every disgruntled relative, that they can spy on their family members in their most vulnerable moments and use that footage to humiliate them in a court of law." Mrs. Hale had a reasonable expectation of privacy in her own kitchen. That expectation was violated. The recording must be suppressed. I sat perfectly still, my hands clasped under the table so tightly my knuckles were white. I knew the law. I knew Lowell had a point. If the judge decided that Veronica's expectation of privacy outweighed the evidence of a crime, the video vanished, and without the video, it was just my word against the word of a weeping, bruised older woman. Jonah Price stood up. He did not smooth his suit. He leaned forward, resting his knuckles on the table, looking less like an orator and more like a mechanic explaining why the engine had blown. "Your Honor, Mr. Lowell is discussing privacy as if Mrs. Hale were discussing a recipe or a bank transfer. She was not. She was committing a violent assault. There is no reasonable expectation of privacy during the commission of a crime, regardless of where it occurs." Jonah picked up a file and flipped it open. "Furthermore, the kitchen is a common area of the home. Ms. Torres was an invited guest. She was not hiding a recording device. She was holding her phone in plain view in a hallway she had permission to be in. She began recording not to spy, but because she heard screams. She feared for the physical safety of the defendant and the homeowner. This falls under the emergency exception, To suppress this evidence is to say that a witness to an assault must cover their eyes and ears because the assault is happening in a private residence. Judge Whitaker sat behind the bench, his face unreadable. He tapped his pen against the rim of his water glass. Tap, tap, tap. The sound was maddening. "It is a gray area. Gentlemen," Whitaker said finally, "we have a non-party recording an interaction. We have the privacy of the home versus the evidence of an alleged battery. I am not comfortable ruling on this from the bench today. I want briefs from both of you. Cite me case law regarding third-party recordings in domestic violence incidents specifically. I will give you 48 hours. My heart sank. 48 hours. 2 more days of not knowing if my only lifeline would be cut. As we packed up our briefcases, Veronica turned to look at me. Her face was composed, her mask firmly in place. She leaned in slightly as she passed the defense table. "You look tired, Kylie," she whispered, loud enough for me to hear but soft enough to escape the court reporter's microphone. "You should rest. It is only going to get harder." I did not respond. I just watched her walk out, her arm linked through my father's. Dad did not look at me. He looked at the floor, marching to her rhythm. A soldier in an army he did not realize he had been conscripted into. The waiting was agony, so I did the only thing I knew how to do. I worked. Since I was suspended and barred from the bureau, I turned my attention to the one thing Veronica could not hide: the money. With the help of a forensic accountant Jonah had recommended, a man named Silverman who smelled like pipe tobacco and saw patterns in spreadsheets like a mystic reading tea leaves, we began to dissect the financial history of the Hubbard family. It was worse than I thought. I spent that night in my apartment, surrounded by bank statements I had obtained through a discovery request regarding my own trust fund. My mother had left a small inheritance, $25,000, specifically designated for my graduate school education. Dad had been the trustee. I traced the transaction history. The money had sat there, earning modest interest, until 3 years ago. Then, on a Tuesday in March, the entire balance was transferred out. I followed the routing number. It did not go to a university. It did not go to a legitimate investment firm. It went to an LLC called VH Consulting. I pulled the registration for VH Consulting. It was a shell company registered to a post office box in Delaware. The signing officer? Veronica Hale. She had stolen my mother's last gift to me. She had drained the account, likely telling my father she was reinvesting it for better returns, and then she had funneled it into her own pocket. I felt a cold, sharp rage settle in my chest. It wasn't about the money. I could earn money. It was about the erasure. She was systematically deleting every trace of my mother from my father's life, converting memories into cash to buy handbags and influence. The next morning, I brought the findings to Jonah. He added them to the pile, but we had another visitor. Mrs. Gable, a woman who had lived next door to my father for 30 years, was sitting in Jonah's waiting room. She was 72, wearing a floral raincoat and clutching a purse that looked like it contained hard candies and tissues. "Kylie," she said, standing up when she saw me. "I saw the news. I told my son. I said, 'That is not right. That is just not right.'" Mrs. Gable agreed to sign a sworn affidavit. She sat in Jonah's office and told us what she had heard through the open windows during the summer months. "It wasn't just arguing," Mrs. Gable said, her voice trembling slightly. "It was the way she spoke to you, Kylie, even when you were grown, visiting on weekends. I heard her in the garden once. You were inside. She was on the phone with someone. She said, 'If that girl interferes with the timeline, I will make her disappear from this house. Greg does whatever I tell him to do.'" Jonah stopped typing. "She said she would make her disappear?" "She said it like she was talking about taking out the trash." Mrs. Gable said, "It gave me the chills. I never liked her. She always smiled too much with her mouth and not enough with her eyes." Silverman, the accountant, called an hour later. He had found the churning. "It is a classic elder abuse pattern," Silverman explained over the speakerphone. "She moves money from a stable, low-risk account into a high-risk joint account. She generates fees, confuses the paper trail, and then withdraws management expenses. Your father's retirement fund has lost 40% of its value in 2 years, but Veronica's personal liquidity has increased by almost the exact same amount. She is cannibalizing his future to fund her present. We had the motive, we had the pattern, we had the threat, but we still needed the video. 48 hours later, we were back in the small courtroom. Judge Whitaker took the bench. He looked tired. He had a stack of papers in front of him. "I have reviewed the briefs," Whitaker said, "and I have reviewed the case law regarding the admissibility of recordings in domestic violence cases." The room went silent. I could hear the hum of the air conditioning vent. "Mr. Lowell makes a compelling argument regarding privacy," Whitaker said. "However, the court finds that the evidentiary value of the recording outweighs the privacy interest, particularly given the allegations of physical violence. The emergency exception applies here. Ms. Torres was acting out of a reasonable fear for the safety of the occupants." I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. Veronica stiffened in her chair. "However," Whitaker continued, raising a finger, "I am admitting the video conditionally, because it captures only a portion of the event, and because the audio is subject to interpretation. Ms. Torres must testify. She must subject herself to cross-examination regarding the context of the recording. If she does not testify, the video is out." It was a victory, but it came with a heavy cost. Mia would have to take the stand. She would have to face Graham Lowell, who would tear her apart. She would have to look her aunt and uncle in the eye and testify against them. I looked at Veronica. For the first time, the mask was gone. She was not crying. She was not trembling. She was gripping the armrest of her chair so hard that her knuckles were yellow. Her jaw was set in a hard, jagged line. She looked at me, and there was no sweetheart in her eyes. There was only pure, unadulterated malice. She knew the video was the one thing she couldn't charm her way out of. But Graham Lowell was not done. He stood up, unfazed by the ruling. "We respect the court's decision," Lowell said. "However, since we are proceeding to trial, the plaintiff, has a motion regarding the defendant's competency." Jonah stiffened beside me. "Objection, Your Honor. This is a criminal trial, not a custody hearing." "Your Honor," Lowell plowed on. "Ms. Hubbard is claiming self-defense. She is claiming that her perception of the event is the accurate one. Yet, we have information that Ms. Hubbard has a history of psychological instability, panic attacks, trauma therapy. We believe her perception of reality is distorted by her past trauma. We are requesting an independent psychological evaluation and access to her therapy records from the last 5 years." "That is a fishing expedition," Jonah argued, his voice rising. "They are trying to put the victim on trial." "She is the defendant, Mr. Price," Whitaker reminded him gently. "She is the one charged with assault. If she is going to claim my client is a master manipulator who gaslit her for 20 years, Lowell said smoothly, then the jury has a right to know if Ms. Hubbard is prone to paranoia. If she imagines threats where there are none, it goes to credibility." Judge Whitaker rubbed his temples. "I will grant a limited evaluation. No full access to past records unless the evaluator deems it necessary, but I will allow the state to have their own expert assess Ms. Hubbard." "Thank you, Your Honor," Lowell said, sitting down with a smug satisfaction. We walked out of the courtroom into the harsh fluorescent light of the hallway. Jonah pulled me into a quiet corner. "They are going to come at you hard, Kylie," Jonah said, his voice low and urgent. "They are going to take every time you cried in a therapist's office, every time you admitted you felt insecure or anxious, and they are going to spin it. They are going to try to paint you as a hysterical woman who attacked her mother because she has unresolved mommy issues." I leaned against the cool plaster wall. I thought about the years of therapy I had gone through to undo the damage Veronica had caused. I thought about the panic attacks in college, the nights I woke up gasping for air because I dreamt I was suffocating in that gray house. I had spent so long trying to hide those cracks, I had tried to be perfect, to be the strong investigator, so no one would ever know how broken I felt inside. But hiding was what Veronica wanted. Hiding was what allowed her to win. "Let them look," I said. Jonah looked at me, surprised. "Kylie, it will be brutal." "I know," I said. "But I am done hiding. If being broken means I survived her, then I will wear that. Let them evaluate me. Let them see that I have anxiety. But let them also see that my anxiety didn't make me a liar. It made me observant." I looked down the hall. Veronica was arguing with Graham Lowell. Her perfect composure was fraying at the edges. She was snapping at him, her hands waving in the air. "If they want to put my mind on trial," I said, watching her, "that is fine. As long as we put her history on trial too, I will take the hit. Jonah, just make sure you land the punch when it counts." Jonah nodded slowly. "Okay, we do it the hard way." I walked out of the courthouse feeling lighter than I had in weeks. They were going to strip me bare. Yes, but in doing so, they were stripping away the last of Veronica's leverage. I had nothing left to lose, and that made me the most dangerous person in the room, 3 days before the trial that would decide the rest of my life. My phone rang at 2 in the morning. It was not a number I recognized, but the area code was local. When I answered, expecting a wrong number or perhaps a harassing prank from one of Veronica's supporters, I heard the sterile, professional voice of a hospital administrator. My father, Greg Hubbard, had been admitted to the emergency room. Overdose. The word hung in the dark silence of my apartment like a guillotine blade. Overdose. My father did not drink heavily. He did not take drugs. He took blood pressure medication and a mild beta blocker for his heart. He was a man of routine, of careful measurements and pill organizers. I drove to the hospital with my hazard lights flashing, tearing through red lights in the empty streets of Riverton. The rain was coming down in sheets, blurring the world into streaks of neon and black asphalt. My mind was racing, running simulations that all ended in disaster. Had the stress killed him? Had he tried to end it? Or was this something else? When I sprinted into the intensive care waiting room, shaking the rain from my coat, I saw her. Veronica was standing by the double doors that led to the patient rooms. She was not alone. 2 hospital security guards were flanking her. She looked immaculate, of course, even at 3 in the morning, amidst a family tragedy. She was wearing a crisp trench coat, her hair brushed, her face a mask of tragic resolve. I didn't care. I surged forward. "Where is he? Is he alive?" Veronica held up a hand, palm out. It was a stop sign. "You cannot be here, Kylie." "Get out of my way, Veronica," I growled, stepping closer. "That is my father. And I have a restraining order that says you must stay 500 feet away from me," she said, her voice steady, loud enough for the guards to hear. She pulled a folded piece of paper from her purse. She had brought the court order to the emergency room. "If you take one more step, I will have these gentlemen arrest you, again." I looked at the security guards. One of them, a heavy-set man with a kind face, looked apologetic. "Ma'am, if the order is valid, we have to enforce it. You can't be in this wing." "He is dying," I shouted, my voice cracking. "I just want to see him." "He does not want to see you," Veronica said. Her voice dropped to a sorrowful whisper, perfect for the audience of nurses and guards. "He took those pills because he was heartbroken. Kylie, he couldn't handle the shame. He couldn't handle what you did to us. Do not make this worse. Go away." I stood there, paralyzed by a rage so hot it felt like it was burning my skin. She was doing it. She was turning his near-death experience into another piece of evidence against me. Look what the unstable daughter made her poor father do. I had no choice. If I violated the order now, 3 days before trial, Jonah wouldn't be able to save me. I backed away, my hands trembling and fists at my sides. I retreated to the vending machine alcove around the corner, out of sight but close enough to watch the corridor. I stood there for an hour, staring at the reflection of my own wrecked face in the glass of the snack machine. I felt useless. I felt like the child she had always treated me as. Then, a young nurse with purple scrubs walked by. She stopped at the vending machine to buy a diet soda. She glanced at me, then at the security desk where Veronica was holding court with a doctor, looking distraught. The nurse didn't look at me directly. She pretended to struggle with the change return slot. "You are the daughter, right?" she whispered, barely moving her lips. I nodded, stepping closer. "Is he okay?" "He is stable. They pumped his stomach," she murmured. "It was sleeping pills, a lot of them." "He doesn't take sleeping pills," I said. The nurse finally looked at me. Her eyes were wide, nervous. "That is what I told the police. But the wife, she said he has been depressed. She said she laid them out for him on the nightstand because he asked for help sleeping, and then she went to shower. When she came back, the bottle was empty." "She laid them out for him?" I repeated, a cold chill seizing my heart. "She administered his heart meds earlier, too," the nurse said, her voice dropping even lower. "I saw the chart. She is very hands-on, maybe too hands-on. When the doctor asked why it took her an hour to call 911 after she found him, she said she was trying to wake him up herself first. But the timeline doesn't fit the toxicology levels. He had been out for a while." She grabbed her soda and walked away before I could ask anything else. I leaned against the cold wall, my knees buckling. It wasn't a suicide attempt. It was a test run. Or maybe it was a warning shot. Veronica had controlled the dose, controlled the timeline, and now she was controlling the narrative. She needed Greg to be the victim of my cruelty, so she made him a victim in reality. I drove home as the sun was coming up, the gray light of dawn making the world look washed out and dead. I felt entirely defeated. The system protected the person with the best story, and right now, Veronica's story was a tragedy, and I was the villain. I spent the day in a fog. I tried to call the hospital, but my name was on a block list. I tried to call Jonah, but he was in court on another matter. I sat on my floor, surrounded by the files of Veronica's past victims, the men who lost their houses, the uncle who lost his will, and realized my father was just another file in the making. Then, at 6 p.m, my phone buzzed. Voice message received. Unknown number. I pressed play. The audio was staticky, filled with the beep hiss of hospital machinery. Then, a voice, weak, slurring, broken. "Kylie?" It was Dad. "Kylie, I'm sorry," he rasped. The effort seemed to cost him everything. "I should have listened. The papers. She made me sign the papers while I was—" There was a rustling sound, a sharp intake of breath, then a click, and the line went dead. I stared at the phone. He had called me, in a moment of lucidity. While Veronica was likely in the bathroom or getting coffee, he had called me. She made me sign the papers. She had used his overdose, his vulnerability, to get the signature she needed, the durable power of attorney. She had probably guided his hand while he was still groggy. I saved the voicemail. I backed it up to the cloud. I emailed it to Jonah. It was proof of coercion. But was it enough to stop the assault trial? No. It was a separate crime, a separate fight. I was fighting a war on 2 fronts, and I was losing both. A knock on my door made me jump. I wasn't expecting anyone. I grabbed the baseball bat I kept by the umbrella stand, a habit from my days investigating violent offenders, and looked through the peephole. It was Mia. My cousin looked like she had been through a war zone. Her hair was wet from the rain, plastered to her skull. Her eyes were swollen shut from crying. She was clutching her oversized tote bag to her chest like a shield. I opened the door and pulled her inside. "Mia, what happened?" She collapsed onto my sofa, burying her face in her hands. "They hate me, Kylie. They all hate me." I sat beside her, rubbing her back. "Who?" "Mom, Aunt Linda, Uncle Bob, everyone," she sobbed. "We had a family dinner tonight. Mom made me go. She said we needed to pray for Greg, but the moment we sat down, they started on me. They said I was a traitor. They said you had brainwashed me. Uncle Bob said I was looking for attention and that I was going to send an innocent woman to jail because I was jealous of her money. I am so sorry, Mia, I whispered. You don't have to do this. You can step back. Mia sat up. She wiped her face with her sleeve, smearing mascara across her cheek. Her expression changed. The fear was still there, but beneath it, something harder had formed. No, she said. I listened to them talk for an hour. They were rewriting history. Kylie, they were saying how Veronica has been an angel, how she paid for the new roof, how she takes care of Greg. They completely ignored the fact that she isolates him. They ignored the fact that you are banned from the hospital. She reached into her bag. So I left, Mia said. I walked out while they were eating dessert, and I sat in my car and I watched the video again. Not just the slap, the end, the part where she whispers. The motive, I said. Yeah, Mia nodded. I listened to it 10 times. Just sign the papers, and the accounts will be safe. She wasn't scared of you, Kylie. She was scared of losing the money. She was scared you would hire that lawyer and freeze the assets. Mia pulled out a small silver USB drive. She placed it on the coffee table between us. It looked so small to contain so much destruction. I brought this for you, she said. It is the original file. The metadata is intact. It proves I didn't edit it. Thank you, I said, reaching for it. But that is not all I did, Mia said, her voice trembling slightly. I stopped. What do you mean? I figured, if this is about money, then the assault trial is just a distraction. Mia said, so before I came here, I sent a copy, an encrypted copy. Sent it where? To the Riverton Financial Crimes Division, Mia said. I found the tip line on their website. I uploaded the video, and I wrote a summary of what I heard at the hospital tonight about the power of attorney she made him sign. I stared at my cousin. The girl who used to be afraid to order pizza over the phone had just dropped a nuclear bomb on Veronica Hale. Mia, I breathed. Do you know what this means? Once the feds or the state financial guys get involved, it is out of our hands. They will audit everything. Good, Mia said. Her chin went up. I got a call back within 20 minutes. Kylie, a detective named Miller. He said he watched the video. He said the phrase, accounts will be safe, combined with the timing of the overdose was highly suspicious. He is coming to the trial. He is coming to the trial? He is going to sit in the back, Mia said. He said he wants to see her under oath. He said if she lies about the money while he is sitting there, he can nail her for perjury on top of the fraud. I looked at the USB drive, then at Mia. She was shaking, terrified of her mother, terrified of the family, but she was sitting there with her back straight. They told me if I testified, I was dead to them, Mia said quietly. Aunt Linda said I would never be invited to Christmas again. We can have Christmas here, I said, taking her hand. It will be quiet, and we will probably just order Chinese food, but it will be real. Mia squeezed my hand back. I don't care if they hate me. I saw Greg in that hospital bed. Kylie, he looked so small. If I don't speak up, she's going to kill him. Maybe not tomorrow, maybe not next week, but she will use him up until he is gone, and I can't live with that. She took a deep breath and stood up. I am ready, she said. Let's go burn her down. I looked at the clock. It was midnight. The trial began in 33 hours. My father was in a hospital bed, trapped by a woman who viewed him as a checkbook with a pulse. My family had disowned me. My career was hanging by a thread. But for the first time since Veronica Hale walked into our lives with her jasmine perfume and her cold eyes, I didn't feel alone. I had the truth. I had the evidence. And I had a cousin who had just decided that being a good girl wasn't worth the price of her soul. I picked up the USB drive. It felt warm in my hand. Okay, I said. Let's get to work. The day the trial began. The air in the Lakehurst County Courthouse felt heavy, charged with the static of a storm that had been building for 20 years. I sat at the defendant's table, my hands clasped tight to stop them from shaking. I wore a navy blue suit. the kind I would usually wear to testify as an officer. But today it felt like a costume. I was not Officer Hubbard today. I was just Kylie, the ungrateful daughter. The jury selection had taken 2 agonizing days. Looking at the 12 people sitting in the box, my heart sank. They were mostly middle-aged, respectable citizens who looked like they baked casseroles for church potlucks and coached Little League. They were people who believed in the sanctity of the nuclear family. They were people who would look at a weeping stepmother and see their own wives, their own sisters. They carried the invisible baggage of societal expectation. Children should respect their parents, and women who look like Veronica Hale do not break the law. Graham Lowell stood up to deliver his opening statement. He moved with the grace of a ballroom dancer, gliding across the floor, making eye contact with every juror. "This case," Lowell began, his voice rich with manufactured sorrow, "is a tragedy. It is the story of a woman, Veronica Hale, who did nothing but love a broken family. She took in a grieving widower. She raised a motherless child. She gave everything she had to build a home, and in return, she was met with jealousy, with resentment, and finally, on a night when she feared for her safety in her own kitchen, with physical violence." He pointed a finger at me. It felt like a gun barrel. "The defendant, Kylie Hubbard, wants you to believe she is the victim, but the evidence will show that she is a woman consumed by a lifelong grudge, a woman who finally snapped and attacked the very person who tried to save her." Veronica sat at the plaintiff's table, dabbing her eyes with a lace handkerchief. She looked small. She looked shattered. She looked perfect. I saw a woman in the second row of the jury box tilt her head in sympathy. We were losing before we had even started. When it was Jonah's turn, he did not glide. He walked to the podium and gripped it with both hands. "Graham Lowell wants to tell you a story about a wicked stepdaughter," Jonah said, his voice steady and unadorned. "But I want to talk about facts. Kylie Hubbard is not just a daughter. She is a decorated investigator for the Riverview Special Crimes Bureau. She has dedicated her entire adult life to one thing: protecting victims of domestic violence. She knows what abusers look like. She knows how they talk. And she knows that the most dangerous abusers are not the ones who scream in public. They are the ones who demand silence in private." Jonah paused, letting the silence stretch. "This case is not about a daughter snapping. It is about a woman who finally refused to be silent. And we will prove to you that the silence she broke was covering up a crime far worse than a slap." The trial moved fast. Veronica took the stand first. She was brilliant. She cried exactly when she needed to, her voice breaking as she described how terrified she was when I shoved her. "I just wanted a normal family," she sobbed, looking directly at the jury. "I tried so hard to be a mother to her, but she always looked at me with such hate. I thought if I just loved her enough, it would go away. I never thought she would hit me." I watched the jury. They were buying it. I could see it in their faces, the softening of their expressions, the hard looks they cast my way. Then it was my turn. Walking to the witness stand felt like walking to the gallows. I swore to tell the truth, and for the first time in my life, I felt the full weight of what that meant. Jonah guided me through the early years. I talked about the gray house. I talked about the photos of my mother disappearing one by one. I talked about the phrase that became the soundtrack of my childhood: "Don't make your father sad." It was not an explicit threat, I explained, looking at the jury. It was a condition of love. If I had feelings, I was a problem. If I had needs, I was a burden. So I learned to be invisible. Lowell's cross-examination was brutal. He didn't ask about the house. He asked about my mind. "Ms. Hubbard," Lowell said, holding up a file, "is it true you have been in therapy for the last 5 years?" "Yes," I said. "And is it true that your therapist has treated you for anxiety and panic attacks?" "Yes." "Is it true that in 2022, you took a leave of absence from work due to emotional exhaustion?" "I did." Lowell smiled, a predator sensing blood. "So, you admit that you are emotionally unstable? That you have a history of losing control? Isn't it possible, Ms. Hubbard, that in your fragile state, you imagined a threat that wasn't there? That you projected your past trauma onto a loving stepmother? I felt the heat rise in my cheeks. He was using my healing against me. He was trying to paint me as the hysterical woman, the unreliable narrator. I took a deep breath. I looked at Lowell, and then I turned and looked directly at the jury. I do not go to therapy because I'm unstable, Mr. Lowell, I said, my voice ringing clear in the quiet room. I go to therapy because I spend every day staring into the faces of people who have been beaten, manipulated, and broken by the people who claim to love them. I go to therapy so I do not become the people I investigate. It is not a weakness, it is a responsibility, to myself and to the victims I serve. I saw a man in the back row of the jury nod, just a small nod, but it was enough. Then came Mia. My cousin looked younger than 22 as she walked to the stand. She was trembling. She clutched the fabric of her skirt with white-knuckled hands. She was terrified. But she sat down, and she looked at me, and I saw the steel in her spine. Jonah was gentle with her. He asked her about that night. He asked her what she saw. I saw Aunt Veronica push Kylie, Mia said, her voice shaking. I saw her hit Kylie first. And what did you do? Jonah asked. I pulled out my phone, Mia whispered. Why? Jonah asked. Why didn't you run in? Why didn't you call for help? Mia looked at the jury. Tears were streaming down her face now. Because I was scared. Not just of the fighting. I was scared because I knew what would happen. I knew if I didn't have proof, no one would believe us. No one believes two angry young women when there is a nice, older lady crying. I knew we would lose, so I hit record. Your Honor, Jonah said. The defense enters Defense Exhibit A, the audio and video recording taken by Ms. Torres. The room went dead silent. The bailiff dimmed the lights. The screen on the wall flickered to life. The video was shaky, dark, filmed from the hallway, but the audio was a weapon. Thwack! The sound of the slap echoed off the wood paneling. It was sharp, violent, undeniable. You ruin everything! Veronica's voice on the tape was not the soft, trembling voice the jury had heard an hour ago. It was guttural. It was filled with hate. Then the scuffle, my voice, pleading, Stop it! Do not touch me! And then, the moment that changed everything, the whisper. Don't tell anyone. It hissed through the courtroom speakers like a snake. I saw the jurors recoil. It was primal. It was the sound of a predator securing its prey. But the video didn't stop there. This was the part the police hadn't seen. This was the part Lowell had tried so hard to suppress. On the screen, the police lights faded. The door closed. Veronica turned to my father. Her posture shifted instantly. The victim act dropped. Now they will stand by me. Veronica's voice on the tape was calm, terrifyingly calm. It is better this way. Greg, she was always a liability. Just sign the power of attorney. We need to secure the accounts before she tries to sue us. I did this to keep us safe. Just sign it. The video ended. For 3 seconds, nobody moved. The silence was absolute. It was the sound of a narrative shattering. I looked at the jury. The woman in the second row, the one who had looked sympathetic to Veronica earlier, was staring at the plaintiff's table with a look of pure horror. The man in the back row was writing furiously in his notebook. They had seen the mask slip. They had seen the monster underneath. Jonah called his next witness. The defense calls Detective Mark Miller of the Riverton Financial Crimes Division. Lowell objected immediately, but Judge Whitaker overruled him. Detective Miller walked to the stand. He was a man of numbers, dry and factual, the perfect antidote to Lowell's emotional theatrics. Detective, Jonah asked, did you review the financial records of Greg Hubbard and Veronica Hale? I did, Miller said. And what did you find regarding the accounts Mrs. Hale mentioned in the video? I found a pattern of systematic transfers, Miller stated flatly, beginning 3 days after the defendant was arrested, and escalating significantly after Mr. Hubbard was hospitalized for an overdose last week. Over $200,000 was moved from Mr. Hubbard's retirement accounts into 3 shell companies registered in Delaware. The sole signatory on those companies is Veronica Hale. The gasp in the courtroom wasn't from the jury, it was from the gallery. My father was sitting there, looking pale and small. He had his hand over his mouth. He was staring at the back of his wife's head as if he were seeing a stranger. So, Jonah summarized, while Mrs. Hale was claiming to be terrified of her stepdaughter, she was actively liquidating her husband's life savings? That appears to be the case, Miller said. Graham Lowell stood up for cross-examination. He looked desperate. His smooth facade was cracking. He didn't have a defense for the numbers. So he attacked the source. Ms. Torres, Lowell said, turning back to Mia, who was still sitting in the front row. You expect us to believe this video is real? In the age of AI? In the age of deep fakes? You hated your aunt. You wanted to destroy her. Isn't it true you edited this? You doctored the audio to make her sound like a villain? Objection, Jonah shouted. I have a forensic report, Lowell yelled, waving a piece of paper that I knew was baseless. This is a setup, a conspiracy by 2 jealous girls to ruin a good woman. It is not a fake, Mia shouted from her seat, breaking protocol. I was there. And then it happened. Veronica Hale stood up. She didn't stand up gracefully. She shot up from her chair like a spring had coiled too tight and finally snapped. Her face was red. Her veins were bulging. The victim was gone. The saint was gone. You little bitch, Veronica screamed, pointing a shaking finger at Mia. You ungrateful little spy. I fed you. I welcomed you. And you recorded me? You think you can take me down? I am the only reason this family still has a roof over its head. She spun toward me, her eyes wild. And you? You plotted this. You rigged this whole thing because you couldn't stand that your father loved me more. You rigged it. Order! Judge Whitaker slammed his gavel down. Order in the court. They are lying! Veronica shrieked, her voice reaching a pitch that made the jurors flinch. They are trying to steal my money. It is my money. I earned it dealing with that pathetic old man. The courtroom froze. Pathetic old man. She had said it, out loud, in front of the jury, in front of the judge, in front of my father. Judge Whitaker banged his gavel again, harder this time. Mrs. Hale, sit down and be silent or I will hold you in contempt. Officers, secure the courtroom. Veronica looked around, panting, her chest heaving. She seemed to suddenly realize where she was. She looked at the jury, who were staring at her with expressions of revulsion. She looked at Lowell, who had his head in his hands. She looked at my father, who was weeping silently in the gallery. And then she looked at me. I didn't look away. I didn't flinch. I sat there, calm and still, watching the wreckage of her own making. She had spent 20 years building a fortress of lies, and she had just blown it up with her own voice. I think, Jonah whispered to me, leaning close, that cross-examination is finished. I looked at the empty witness stand where the truth had finally, violently, been set free. The echo of her scream still hung in the air, but for the first time in my life, it didn't scare me. It sounded like victory. The closing arguments began under a heavy, suffocating silence, the kind that usually precedes a tornado. Graham Lowell looked tired. His suit seemed to hang a little looser on his frame than it had at the start of the week. He tried to salvage the wreckage of his client's reputation, but his heart wasn't in it. He paced in front of the jury box, using phrases like complex family dynamics and unfortunate misunderstanding. We cannot criminalize a domestic argument, Lowell pleaded, his voice lacking its usual baritone richness. Families fight, words are said, but to brand a grieving widow as a thief and a liar based on a few seconds of grainy video, that is a bridge too far. This was a scuffle, ladies and gentlemen, a scuffle between 2 women who were both under immense stress. It was not a crime. He sat down. He didn't even look at Veronica. Jonah Price stood up. He didn't use notes. He walked to the center of the room and looked at the jury. Not as a lawyer, but as a man tired of seeing the truth hidden under layers of politeness. "The defense attorney wants you to believe this was a scuffle," Jonah said, his voice ringing clear. "He wants you to believe that stress causes a woman to drain her husband's life savings while he lies in a hospital bed. But I want you to focus on one thing, one sentence." Jonah turned and pointed at the empty witness stand. "Don't tell anyone." He let the words hang there. In my client's line of work, and in mine, we hear that phrase constantly. It is the anthem of the abuser. It is the lock on the prison door. Abusers do not ask for silence to protect the family. They demand silence to protect themselves. For 20 years, Veronica Hale used that silence to isolate a father from his daughter. She used it to rewrite reality. And when Kylie Hubbard finally refused to be silent, Mrs. Hale did what every tyrant does when their control is challenged. She attacked. Jonah walked back to our table and rested his hand on my shoulder. "This was not a loss of temper," Jonah concluded. "This was a business transaction. Mrs. Hale assaulted my client to remove an obstacle. She tried to destroy Kylie Hubbard's reputation so that no one would believe her when the money started disappearing. Do not let her win. Do not let the silence win." The jury filed out to deliberate. The waiting is always the hardest part. In the movies, it takes 5 minutes. In reality, it takes hours that feel like years. I sat on a wooden bench in the hallway, the fluorescent lights humming overhead. My father was sitting on a bench 30 feet away, staring at his shoes. Veronica was nowhere to be seen. She had retreated to a private conference room with Lowell, presumably to scream at him. I rubbed my wrist, tracing the phantom memory of the bruise she had left there. I thought about the hundreds of women I had interviewed in rooms just like this. Women who sat on these benches shaking, terrified that their abuser would walk free, terrified that the system would tell them they were crazy. I had always been the one holding the clipboard, telling them to be strong. I never understood, until right now, just how heavy that request was. Mia sat next to me. She was shredding a paper coffee cup into tiny pieces. "I am sorry," she whispered, her voice thick with guilt. "For what?" I asked. "For waiting so long," she said. "I should have shown you that video the night it happened. I should have walked into the kitchen and stopped her. If I hadn't been such a coward, you wouldn't be sitting here facing a criminal record." I reached out and stopped her hands from tearing the cup. "Mia, look at me. You stood up in a courtroom in front of your mother, your aunt, and the entire town, and you called them liars. You saved my life today. No one taught us how to fight a war in our own living room. We had to figure it out. But you did it. You broke the cycle." Mia looked at me, tears welling in her eyes, and leaned her head on my shoulder. We sat like that, 2 soldiers in the trenches, until the bailiff opened the door. "The jury has reached a verdict." Walking back into the courtroom felt like walking underwater. The air was thick. I stood up as the jury foreman, a gray-haired man who looked like a retired teacher, stood up holding a slip of paper. "In the matter of the state versus Kylie Hubbard," the foreman read, his voice steady. "On the charge of misdemeanor domestic assault, we find the defendant not guilty." I let out a breath that felt like it had been trapped in my lungs since I was 12 years old. Jonah squeezed my arm. "On the matter of the restraining order requested by the plaintiff," the foreman continued, "we find the request baseless and denied. The jury further notes for the record that the defendant's actions appear to be consistent with self-defense." Judge Whitaker nodded. He looked at me, and for the first time, his eyes were kind. "Ms. Hubbard, you are discharged. The protective order against you is immediately dissolved. You are free to go." I slumped into my chair, relief washing over me in a cold wave, but the show wasn't over. Before the gallery could erupt, a man in a cheap suit stood up in the back row. It was Detective Miller from the Financial Crimes Division. He walked through the gate separating the gallery from the well of the court. "Your Honor," Miller said, holding up a document. "I apologize for the interruption, but in light of the sworn testimony given today regarding the plaintiff's financial activities, the District Attorney's Office has issued an immediate subpoena for Mrs. Veronica Hale." "Veronica," who had been staring blankly at the table, snapped her head up. "We are opening a formal investigation into elder abuse, fraud, and the misappropriation of assets belonging to Mr. Greg Hubbard," Miller announced, his voice carrying to every corner of the room. "Mrs. Hale, you are to surrender your passport immediately. You are considered a flight risk." Veronica let out a sound that was half gasp, half sob. She looked at Lowell, grabbing his arm. "Do something! They can't do this!" Lowell gently peeled her fingers off his sleeve. He began packing his briefcase. "I handle domestic civil cases. Veronica, I do not handle federal fraud indictments. You are going to need a different lawyer." Judge Whitaker looked down at Veronica. His expression was stern, lacking any of the patience he had shown earlier in the trial. "Mrs. Hale," Whitaker said, his voice booming, "you came into my courtroom asking for protection. You claimed you were a victim. You told this court that your stepdaughter was a danger to your family." He leaned forward. "You told her not to tell anyone," the judge said, quoting the video. "You tried to use the secrecy of the home to hide your malice. Let me be clear. The court system exists precisely because what happens behind closed doors is everyone's business when it involves abuse. You tried to weaponize the law against the person who was trying to protect your husband. That silence ends today." He banged the gavel. It sounded like a gunshot ending a war. The courtroom dissolved into chaos. Reporters were shouting questions. The bailiff was moving toward Veronica to take her passport. Amidst the noise, I felt a hand on my elbow. It was my father. Greg Hubbard looked 10 years older than he had yesterday. His skin was gray, and he was leaning heavily on a cane I hadn't seen him use before. He looked at me, his eyes filling with tears. "Kylie," he choked out. I didn't know. I swear to you, I didn't know about the accounts." "I know you didn't, Dad," I said softly. "I am so sorry." He wept, reaching out a trembling hand. "I was so afraid of being alone. I was so afraid of the fighting. I let her turn me against you. You were right. You were right about everything. Can you ever forgive me?" I looked at him. I looked at the man who had stood by while my mother's pictures were taken down. I looked at the man who had told the police I pushed her. I loved him. He was my father. But love isn't a magic eraser. It doesn't wipe away the years of gaslighting or the betrayal of the last month. I didn't hug him. I didn't wail or tell him it was okay, because it wasn't okay. "I am glad you are safe, Dad," I said, my voice steady. "I will help the detectives get your money back, but I can't come to Sunday dinner, not for a long time." He nodded, the tears falling freely now. He understood. He had made his choice years ago, and while he could change his mind now, he couldn't change the past. "I understand," he whispered. I turned away from him. It was the hardest thing I had ever done, but it was also the most necessary. I had to save myself before I could ever think about saving him again. I walked toward the exit. The double doors pushed open, and the flash of cameras blinded me for a second. But the reporters weren't swarming me. They were swarming Veronica, who was being escorted out by Detective Miller, her coat pulled up over her face to hide from the very cameras she had courted just a week ago. "Mrs. Hale? Did you steal the money? Mrs. Hale, did you stage the assault?" I watched her for a second. The saint of Lakehurst now paraded as a fraud. I felt no joy. I just felt a deep, abiding exhaustion. Jonah steered me toward a side door. "Let's go the back way. You don't need that circus." We stepped out into the cool afternoon air of the alleyway. It smelled of rain and wet pavement. It smelled like freedom. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was Captain Miller from the bureau. "Hubbard," his voice was gruff but warm. "I just saw the news. The suspension is lifted. Your badge is on my desk. When can you come back?" "Monday," I said. "I will be there Monday." "Good," the captain said. "And listen, the director was watching the trial. He wants to talk to you. He thinks we have a blind spot when it comes to victims who work in law enforcement. He wants you to lead a new training module. He wants you to teach us how to spot the signs when it is one of our own." I closed my eyes, taking a deep breath. "I would like that," Captain, I would like that very much. I hung up. Mia was waiting for me by her car. We didn't say much. We drove out of the city, away from the cameras, away from the noise. We drove until we reached the outskirts of Maple Glen, to a small stone church with a cemetery in the back. It was where my mother was buried. We walked to her grave. The grass was wet. I knelt down and brushed a few dead leaves off the headstone. I hadn't been here in years because Veronica always made me feel guilty for living in the past. I lit a small candle I had brought from the car. The flame flickered in the breeze, stubborn and bright. I thought about the little girl who used to hide in her room so she wouldn't make her father sad. I thought about the woman who had been thrown into a cabinet and told to shut up. And I thought about the woman standing here today, bruised but standing. Mom, I did not stay silent, I whispered into the wind. Mia squeezed my hand. We stood there until the sun went down, reclaiming the history that had been stolen from us. The story doesn't end with a fairy tale, it ends with work. 6 months later, I sat in a different courtroom. This time, I wasn't at the defendant's table. I was in the witness box, wearing my badge, testifying as an expert witness in a coercion case involving a young wife and a wealthy, controlling husband. The prosecutor asked me to explain the dynamics of control. Investigator Hubbard, she asked, how do you know when a domestic situation has moved from dysfunctional to criminal? What is the red flag? I looked at the young woman sitting at the plaintiff's table. She was trembling. She looked like she wanted to disappear. I knew that feeling. I knew it in my bones. I leaned into the microphone. Control isn't always about bruises, I said, my voice filling the room. It is about silence. When someone hurts you and then tells you that you are crazy for feeling hurt, that is control. And if someone ever tells you, don't tell anyone, I paused, locking eyes with the young woman. That is the exact moment you need to scream it to the world. The revenge wasn't about seeing Veronica in handcuffs. Though the 5-year sentence for fraud she eventually received was justice, the revenge was this. It was taking the weapon she used to destroy me, my voice, and turning it into a shield for everyone else. She wanted me to be silent. Instead, I became the loudest woman in the room. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I would love to know where you are tuning in from. Are you listening while driving, cooking, or maybe just relaxing at home? Please let me know in the comments below so we can connect. And if this story touched you, please subscribe to the channel Lila Revenge Stories, like this video, and smash that hype button to help this story reach more people who might need to hear it. Your support means the world to me.